This is titled Jesus' Bold Claim, and we'll just go through here. So we get the outlines. I don't know if Galen was able to put them together, but maybe these are perfect. If you would be gracious enough to hand those out. So we do have an outline here, and the first part of the outline is the rejection of Jesus, the promise of true life, the misunderstanding, and the bold claim and response. So for those of you, again, just to kind of get it back to where we are, this is the last part of John chapter 8 here. Really, this is kind of in the middle of a back and forth between the Jews and Jesus. Jesus does, says something, the Jews respond to it, the Jews say something, and it's just kind of this back and forth, and it continues here, and we'll sort of unpack it all here. But these are the four parts of the outline here, and so I'm going to unpack this part here, then we're going to do a little summary of John chapter 8 and some practical application for it. Similar to what I did, I think, in John chapter 6, is that there's only like 11 verses here, so I have a little bit of extra time to maybe do some sort of summarization of 8 and some practical stuff. So here we go. So it all fits in one slide here. And again, you can read this on your handout here. The Jews answered him, "Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon?" Jesus answered, "I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death." The Jews said to him, "Now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died, as did the prophets. Yet you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died? And the prophets died. Who do you make yourself out to be?" Jesus answered, "If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say, he is our God. But you have not known him. I know him. If I were to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. So the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and how have you seen Abraham?" Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So this is the rejection of Jesus here by the Jews. It starts off with a personal attack, right? He calls them a Samaritan and a demon. Often when people reject truth, they resort to calling people names and attacking that person's character. I think we can all agree in our society today that that's a lot of what happens, is that people who are exposed to the truth will instead call people names or not focus on the subject. So they call them a Samaritan. That's a very derogatory term. It's an outsider, an enemy of the Jews. Demon-possessed is kind of self-explanatory here. You're either insane or you're evil, right? And his response is he, number one, calmly denies it. I don't have a demon. He doesn't even respond to the charge of the Samaritan part. And Jesus sort of gives like a master class, I would say here, as to sort of how to respond to insults when they do come against you. And not every insult is one that we have to respond to, because people can give you multiple reasons and things to respond to, and sometimes they're just so outlandish and so not true that it doesn't make sense to always focus on that. What he does do is he focuses on, I honor my Father. It's important that we know who we are and whose we are when we're responding to these type of things. His life is defined by obedience, and he is centered on his purpose, right? A life devoted to God is able to contradict any accusations of evil. Then there's this part about you dishonor me. And I think, Kyle had brought this up last week when he talked about the hospitality that Abraham had been known for and that the Jews sort of celebrated. And, it's a true dishonor to not be hospitable to somebody. And so this may be part of that, of him being dishonored in that way. But he feels, again, the injustice, yet he doesn't retaliate. Righteousness, again, does not necessarily mean emotional numbness. Just because we call ourselves Christians and people are attacking us doesn't mean that we're, immune to feeling numb and that we have to numb ourselves to that. We can call it out the way it is. The next part is that he says, I do not seek my own glory. This is really important when we're thinking about, how to respond to somebody, because he's not chasing popularity. He's not chasing human approval in this circumstance here. And there's a freedom in that, right? Because if you're controlled by other people, what they say about you and their insults that are hurled against you, and human approval, then you're always going to have that fear of rejection. But not so Christ. He wasn't seeking his own glory. He was free from that. And ultimately, it lies in the fact that he, placed his faith in the one who seeks and judges. God was going to be the one who was going to vindicate him. He refuses self-promotion or even personal revenge. He leaves his reputation and justice in God's hands. Isn't that interesting? He leaves his reputation and justice in God's hands. So often we try to make our own reputation the most important thing, but it's God's responsibility and what he cares about is most important. So again, I say this is a master class in how to respond to someone who attacks you. These are some of the principles that you can be thinking about, and knowing who you are and how to respond to those type of things. The next thing was we talk about the promise of true life. This is broken up into two things. So there's the condition. If anyone keeps my word. This is not necessarily a mere hearing of the word, like we've talked about, but this is a obedience, an internalization of the truth, a perseverance, and as we've been discussing, an abiding in the truth. And the promise is, he will never see death. There's probably multiple layers to this exactly, but I'll give you three. Number one is that death's terror is removed. Number two is that death's power has been broken. And the last one is eternal death is avoided. So death becomes more of a transition than a defeat, right? So if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. But they misunderstood this, right? They took it to be literal. Here's their reaction. Now we know that you have a demon, right? Isn't that great to say that to somebody's face? You're demon possessed. You're crazy. But I remember. I think it's C.S. Lewis who says this. He is either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord, right? And so their reaction to him is he's either crazy or he's got a demon possessed, and that's the reaction to him, because their logic is, Abraham died, and the prophets died. You can't be right about this. The logic seems sound, but they're obviously approaching it literally, in terms of it being there's obviously spiritual meaning to this, but also pride is something that keeps them from understanding the truth. They assume that no one is greater than Abraham, no one is greater than Moses, no one's greater than the prophet. So they stick to that as pride is when truth is encountered. They set up pride as a barrier for them to actually change that. Next part is that true honor comes from God. He says, if I glory myself, it is nothing. self-promotion is kind of empty. So, if I went out here telling you guys how great I am, and that usually falls flat to a lot of people. But if there's a huge crowd behind people that are sort of promoting you and it's excited, that has more weight to it. But so he's saying, I don't glorify myself. It's meaningless here. But what he does hold to is that the Father is the one who honors the Son, and all his authority comes from him. And it really exposes them that they claim to know God, but they truly are so far away from him and his heart. And again, knowing God is proven by obedience, not just claiming to be close to God, and claiming to be close to Abraham and his background. So it's more important to be of the faith of Abraham and that seed than being of the true seed of Abraham itself. And then we sort of unpack it to this part. It says, your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. And last week, Kyle had pointed out, this is an interesting thing just to think about, was that third visitor. Was it possibly Christ who saw him, or was there in a sort of pre form of Christ before he was in his natural body? But we could also say that he truly saw him by faith, right, through the promises of faith. There's types of Christ that are in the Old Testament, and through the covenant relationship that he had with God. And we know that true faith ultimately produces joy in Christ. So even people that from the Old Testament, their faith was Christ-centered, and they continue to ignore him and basically misunderstand, and they focus on the human aspect of the physical limitations of age. You are not yet 50 years old. And they basically take the spiritual truth and they interpret it in purely human terms. Now comes the bold claim and response to that. So here's the claim. Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. We've been discussing some of these I am statements. I am the bread. I am, there's 7 of them, but this is a little bit different because it's an I am period, right? I am. And obviously, to those of you who are students, this obviously comes from when Moses was told by God, who is going to be sending me? I am. And this basically, this implications for this, what Jesus is saying is that, I'm eternal. I'm before Abraham. I'm greater than Abraham. I'm uncreated outside of time, and he's fully divine. So it's a lot. This is like the theological climax of John chapter 8 here, is that this is a big statement. And if anybody ever asks you, like, well, Jesus never claimed to be God, here's evidence. Because the Jews understood it, and what did they want to do? They wanted to kill him, right? They picked up stones. This was blasphemy to basically claim to be God. They understood his claim. And if they didn't understand it now, he made it very, very clear as to what it was. And so he did withdraw. He hid himself and went out of the temple. Right? It wasn't his time. And that's going to be a theme throughout the book of John. Is there's going to be some talking about the time, is coming, or the time is not yet at hand. So we'll see that as a theme coming up. But ultimately, is that truth is dividing. Right? It either softens people's hearts or hardens them even further. And so we see the true nature of the Jews is that, they really hardened their hearts and they sought to kill him. All right. So that kind of concludes John chapter 8 here. And I'm just going to review this here. This next part is going to be very interesting for you, and I think hopefully enlightening. And it's going to be a little bit deep, so I really ask you to pay attention because I think it's pretty important. But this is what the Lord laid upon my heart to bring forth to you today. So the beginning of John chapter 8 is a woman who is caught in adultery. Obviously, this was a truly shameful experience for her. She had these accusers, I don't know if they're all men, women, whatever it was, but surrounding her, threatening to kill her, to stone her. Ultimately, the verdict came out to be is that they all dropped their stones, and Jesus didn't condemn her. And so Sam had talked about that at the beginning of John 8. Then Julia had discussed that Jesus is the light of the world and the light of life. And she talked about the different aspects of the importance of lights. And we see again the light of life. There's a life attached to it. And then last week, Kyle had tackled this connection between truth and freedom. Truth and freedom. And it talks about that is that the devil is the father of lies and a murderer. And we're going to unpack a little bit here about how he does that. This last part, we talked about, again, that pride that prevents change despite exposure to the truth. Right? He was literally in front of them, the Messiah, and their pride, their arrogance of sticking to things prevented them from understanding the truth. All right. This is from Romans 7 here. And it says, "For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing." And I ask this question, you can raise your hand and say, in your Christian experience, have you had this before where you're like, I want to do this really good thing and I'm not doing it, and then I keep doing this other thing that I really don't want to do? Does that resound to most people? And I think this passage really is probably talking about, this battle against the flesh that we have. This, we have the spirit, we have the flesh. But I think there's another experience that you'll probably also, I think, understand that is a little bit different, and I think will be helpful to expose. So we talked about truth and freedom. What's the opposite of truth and freedom? Lies and bondage, right? What is one form of bondage? Addiction, right? This process of doing the thing that I don't want to do over and over again, and I can't stop it, right? It's a little bit different than what the flesh. You were obviously born, and you had the flesh, the desire, but addiction came over time. Okay, so they're going to be different, and the way that we attack it is going to be different. So it's important to recognize that we will continue to struggle against the flesh for the rest of our life. But the battle against addiction does not have to be a lifelong battle. It is a lie from Satan that tells Christians that this torment is something what you just have to deal with. What are some types of addiction here? Substances, right? I work in a hospital and I see this all the time. Alcohol, drugs, all these different substances that people are addicted to. This is obvious. This is, that people come into the hospital. There's so many other people that are struggling with these things as well. Food, right? People are addicted to food. This doesn't include what is put in food to make it addicting, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff, but people go to food for comfort, right? They go to they can't stop. They have cravings, right? That's something. Pornography, right? This is a big issue, especially for men, and to a lesser degree women. We live in a highly sexualized world where it's very easily accessible, but this is something that's really a significant addiction. Our phones, right? We can't live without our phones apparently, but our phones are designed to have rings to make you, someone messages you and you're like, oh, I gotta read that. Your mind is triggered to do that, right? Social media. This is algorithms, the things that that make us like addicted to that, and like to, the reels and all the short, everything is designed in order to make it addicting to you. Gambling, right? How easy it is to gamble right now. Like, because like sports has like legalized gambling, you could literally just take out your phone, download DraftKings, and be gambling with the money that they give you to do it, right? They're like, oh, if you sign up, if you pay, $5, we'll give you $100. It's like it's made for you to be lured in for that. Work, right? Some people are addicted to work, addicted to the success, to people, giving them praise and to highlighting them and to going up the ladder of success. Okay, this is cut off down here. I don't know why, but there is one more point down here. It's a very important point. Is that all of these are related to something called a dopamine, right? Dopamine hit, right? You gamble, you win big money, it's a hit, right? You eat food, it makes you feel good. You drink, whatever it is. So like these are all things that ultimately end up in a dopamine hit. Okay. I want to unpack for you just how our brains work and how this translates into how addiction works. Because ultimately I want to expose the strategy of Satan and where he's been working so that you or your loved ones don't have to live in bondage any longer. So because we're shining light on this is a topic that needs to be shined on, have lights. We're exposing it to the truth. It's going to begin to lose its power. So once you understand how it works, you're going to understand, why so many times you try to do something on your own or try to do it even in good faith, it doesn't work. So let's sort of unpack this a little bit here. Actions produce results, right? If I go to the gym and do 30 squats and 30 whatever for doing my arms, I'm gonna get good results. I'm gonna be jacked, right? I don't go to the gym as often as I'd like to, but again, that positive action is going to lead to positive results. If I sit on my couch all day long, watch TV, drink beer, eat bad stuff, results are not going to be good. So negative results, negative actions, negative results. Where does this ultimately come from, right? There's sort of this now, we're sort of shifting to the invisible part of things, like in our minds, okay? Well, if we feel, good, if we have some sort of internal motivation, that's going to produce actions and results, right? So like, if I feel motivated to go to the gym, like I'm going to get, act on that, and then I'm going to produce good results as a result of that. Then even further, there's something, your thoughts. Say, you were, in the hospital or whatever it was, and like you sort of have like thoughts about like how you want to, do well for yourself, but get like a massive heart attack, and like what you're thinking about your family, like all these thoughts are going to be lead to like really good motivation, the feelings, actions, and results. So like a lot of times, like it's important to have those thoughts. It talks about this in Scripture, like have your thoughts captive to Christ. But that's not where it ends. And that's where a lot of people may stop, is that beliefs is actually where everything ends up coming from. What we're going to unpack is like, how do we get beliefs? And I talked to you about that Satan is the father of lies, and Christ is the king of truth, right? And there's this dichotomy here. And so let's unpack really, how do beliefs come in the first place? This is the pattern here, is that we have an event happen to us. And most of these things are, you have to think about going back to your sort of childhood and your development of your timeline of your life, is that you have an event happen to you. And our brains need to process and make sense of things in time. And so we create a story for ourselves. And so we make assumptions. This is how our brain works, is that we need to make sense of things that sometimes our 5, 10-year-old self doesn't know how to process, right? And this is where the lies come in, is that we can ultimately have beliefs that are twisted in our lives. And I'm going to show you that in the next section here. And I talked about, there's sort of circle there, is that pride is in there as well. Is that pride really helps to often form lies about these types of stories. And it also protects ourselves from any type of changes. So let's look at this next type of, so what are some types of beliefs from stories? I'll just give you an example here. So say you were bullied when you were younger. This is like a common experience. I was bullied when I was younger. What are some identity stories that you can tell, or identity beliefs from these stories? So I'm unworthy. Or perception belief. Things are always bad for me. What are some lies about people that we could believe? People are always out to get me. Spiritual, like God, doesn't love me or doesn't want to protect me. It's like you have an event that happens, you're bullied, whatever it might happen here, and then Satan twists these things to have identity lies, or lies about people, or lies about about God himself or the Bible or whatever it might be. And so he twists these things so that this is happening over and over again. And so you basically are living with a twisted sense of who your identity is, what you think about people, and what you think about God. So I want to go back to the woman caught in adultery to really kind of bring this home to you. And so I want to just ask you, I'm going to ask actually the women, and I'll ask the men for something else, but for the woman, I want you to answer this, is that based upon if you were in that situation and you were that woman who was caught in adultery right before Christ intervenes, what are some things that you might believe about your identity or about people or about God that may have resulted from this encounter, from this happening? What do you guys think? I'm worthless, right? Anything else? Beyond redemption, absolutely. Anything about God? What could they think about God? God will never forgive me, right? All right, now I'm going to ask the men, if you're Christ, what are some truths that we can use to replace those lies that Satan wanted you to believe about that? Come on, men. Use the sword of truth to knock down the lies that Satan has. God is love. Right, God is love. Anything else? What about identity? Yeah, you were made in the image of God. Right? These are all things that once you understand, sort of how it works, is that, ultimately it comes down to, replacing these truths as lies. So this is the big chart here. And I want you to sort of look at the bottom here, because this really ties it together. If you have, multiple, again, experiences, events throughout your life that have, beliefs that have become lies, this is going to create wounds and pain. Okay? And this is all in the subconscious area, that you have wounds and pain. This is going to result in negative thoughts. It's going to keep you distracted. And it's going to result for you to have a desire, this feeling, this urge to medicate. And how do we medicate? Well, we act out on whatever it is, drugs, alcohol, pornography, whatever it might be. And this gives us this dopamine hit, right? Okay? So how do we fix this whole cycle here? It's not by, again, like having true thoughts is important to do, and like there's many different things, but if you're trying to address the actions and results, it's not going to work. Christ asks you this question, and he asks it in John: do you want to be healed? Right? Do you want to be healed? Where does the healing need to come? In the belief section, right? These wounds, this pain that we're constantly trying to medicate over and over again, and until these lies are replaced with truth, then we're going to have, positive outcomes. So again, you can think about, if this woman if Jesus didn't tell her, you are not condemned, right? Wasn't that a huge statement by Christ where he says, does anyone condemn you? Neither do I condemn you. And so she could live her life in knowing that she was accepted, that she was not condemned, she was not guilty, she was not unworthy, right? Like if you live your life, that way, that's going to result in huge positive results. If she had her belief in, I'm unworthy, I'm ashamed, like those are big wounds to be able to like unpack and to have the pain from, that she would probably continue to medicate on and have to go to. And some of these things end up in, self-harm, and it's obviously very, serious and significant. But ultimately, I want to just encourage you that this process is doable, right? I mean, it's understanding that the belief, we have to get down to the roots of the problem in addiction, right? And so that's where everything is hiding in the darkness, right? Satan doesn't want you to know any of this information because this is how he works. But if we're constantly trying to fix ourselves and trying to enter programs and whatever it is to like fix like the symptoms, like the symptoms are, the addictions. The true root of the problem is the wounds and the things, the pain that we all, have and carry. And that's where Jesus wants to heal you, right? He wants to heal you in those, particular wounds, and that's where the healing, begins. So again, you can knock down the top of the tree, but the roots are going to remain. And so it's important for us to do that, to seek that. These are some resources that are some books by, his name is Neil T. Anderson. I don't know if anyone's heard of these books before. They're written, I think, some of them in the 1990s. But really, again, it deals with a lot of these things of like who I am in Christ. And it talks about like if you're trying to understand, like you go back and you have these events that happen to you and you need to replace these with truths, like this is a book that would be able to say like, hey, like who I am in Christ, these are the truths that I know and I have to stand, but you have to be able to find those roots and then replace them with that. The steps to freedom in Christ. So like all these things are talk about, again, bondage and freedom and identity, but a lot of the lies that we have about ourselves that we keep having to medicate about it are usually a lot of identity problems. So again, this is a lot to unpack, and I encourage you to watch this again. We'll have it recorded for you. But this is something that Satan wants to keep the children of God in bondage so that we will not be serving him. We'll be distracted in trying to work on these things. But once you're unchained, then you become a leader for him, and that you can have a purpose to serve him. So again, I know I went over time and there's a lot to it, but this is what the Lord laid upon me to kind of share with you about, again, darkness and lights and truth and freedom versus, again, the bondage of addiction. So all this close in prayer here.